Hollywood. Late evening. The kind of evening that smelled like cigarette smoke and old money. When studio lights had gone dark, but reputations were still awake, Walter Matthau sat alone in his car. Hands resting on the steering wheel, engine off. The parking lot behind the studio was nearly empty now. It's the way it always was after a long day of pretending everything was fine. The silence pressed in on him, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that forced a man to listen to his own thoughts. He had avoided this moment for months. The envelope lay on the passenger seat. Thick. Heavy. Untouched. $50,000. The number echoed in his mind like a judge's gavel. It wasn't just money. It was pride. It was shame. It was the quiet understanding between two men who had lived long enough to know how fast fortune could turn its back. Walter exhaled slowly and leaned his head back against the seat. His reflection stared back at him from the rearview mirror. Older than he felt, more tired than he let anyone see. On screen, he was sharp, sarcastic, unbreakable. Off-screen, he was a man who had misjudged a deal, trusted the wrong promise, found himself owing a debt he never thought he'd have to admit. And the man he owed it to was Dean Martin. That was the cruel part. Dean wasn't a banker. He wasn't a studio shark. He was supposed to be a friend. Walter closed his eyes, memories drifting in whether he wanted them to or not. Years earlier, Dean Martin had been the calm center of every storm. Where others chased headlines and power, Dean carried himself with an ease that felt almost unfair. He smiled softly, laughed easily, and never made a man feel small in his presence. Unless that man was trying to make himself important. Walter remembered the first time he realized that it was at a charity dinner. Long before the debt, long before the mistake. Walter had been nervous that night, unsure if he belonged in a room full of legends. Dean had noticed immediately. Instead of offering advice or pity, Dean had simply pulled out a chair and said, "Sit. You look like you've been standing too long." No lecture. No judgment. Just space. That was Dean's way, and now Walter owed him $50,000 across town. Dean Martin sat on his patio, a glass of water untouched beside him. The night air was cool, and the city lights flickered like distant stars. He had finished dinner hours ago, but hadn't gone inside yet. He liked the quiet. It reminded him that life didn't always need an audience. Kirk Douglas stood near the railing, arms folded, watching Dean carefully. "You know he's struggling?" Kirk said at last. Dean didn't look up. "Struggling doesn't make him less of a man." Kirk shifted his weight. $50,000 is a lot of money." Dean smiled faintly. So is silence. Kirk studied him. Over decades, he had seen men react to debt in predictable ways. Anger, pressure, humiliation. Dean's calm unsettled him. "He hasn't called," Kirk continued. Dean nodded. "That tells me everything I need to know." Kirk frowned. "What does it tell you?" "That he's ashamed," Dean said gently. "And shame weighs more than money ever could." Kirk let out a slow breath. He had fought wars on screen and off, faced enemies real and imagined. But moments like this quiet moral crossroads always felt heavier. "What are you going to do?" Kirk asked. Dean finally looked up. His eyes weren't hard. They weren't cold. They were tired but kind. "I'm going to wait," he said. "And when he comes, I'll listen." Walter didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Dean's face. Not angry, not disappointed, just patient. That patience terrified him more than rage ever could. By morning, the decision had been made. He dressed carefully, not for style, but for dignity. He shaved slower than usual, as if rushing might somehow cheapen what he was about to do. Before leaving, he picked up the envelope again. It felt heavier now. The drive to Dean's place was quiet. Too quiet. Every red light felt like a moment of judgment. Every mile felt like a countdown. When he finally parked, his hands shook. Walter Matthau had faced critics' failures and decades of scrutiny, hesitated before a simple door. He knocked. Dean opened the door himself. No assistant. No announcement. Just Dean standing there in a plain shirt, sleeves rolled up, as if this were any other visit. "Walter," he said warmly, "you made it." The words hit harder than accusation ever could. Walter swallowed. "Dean?" Dean stepped aside. "Come in. You look like you could use a chair." Inside the house was quiet and lived in. No trophies on display. No reminders of fame. Just comfort and calm. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Walter placed the envelope between them. "I owe you an apology before I owe you this," Walter said, voice tight. "I should have spoken sooner." "I didn't want you to think." Dean raised a hand gently. "I didn't think anything bad." Walter looked up sharply. "You didn't?" "No," Dean said simply. "I figured if you were quiet, it was because you were carrying something heavy." Walter's eyes burned. "I made a bad call," he admitted. "I trusted a promise that vanished the moment it mattered. I kept telling myself I'd fix it before you ever knew how bad it was." Dean nodded, listening. Truly listening. "And when I couldn't," Walter continued, "I started avoiding you. That's the part I'm most ashamed of." Silence filled the room again, but this time it was different, softer, safer. Dean finally reached forward and slid the envelope back toward Walter. Walter froze. "Dean, what are you doing?" Dean's voice was calm, steady. "I'm giving you something," he said. "A chance to breathe." Walter stared at the envelope as if it might explode. "I can't accept that," he whispered. "It's my responsibility." Dean leaned back slightly. "Responsibility doesn't disappear just because kindness shows up." Walter's voice cracked. "Then why?" Dean met his eyes. "Because one day," Dean said quietly, "I was the man sitting in a car, wondering how to admit he needed grace. And someone gave it to me without asking for interest." Walter's composure shattered. Tears spilled before he could stop them, hot, uncontrollable, humiliating tears. He tried to apologize for them, but Dean stood and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't," Dean said softly. "This isn't weakness. This is release." Walter covered his face, shoulders shaking. For the first time in years, the weight lifted. From the doorway, Kirk Douglas watched silently. He had seen dramatic performances that won awards, but nothing he had ever witnessed matched the quiet power of this moment. Two men, one debt, and a kindness that would never make the papers. And Kirk knew without a doubt that this was the story people never got to hear. The morning after Walter Matthau left Dean Martin's house, Hollywood woke up the way it always did, hungry. It didn't know what it was hungry for yet. It just knew there was blood somewhere. Walter sat at his kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. His eyes were swollen from crying the night before, but it wasn't grief that weighed on him now. It was fear. Because mercy, when misunderstood, can become a weapon. He had barely slept. Every sound outside his window felt like an accusation. He kept replaying Dean's words in his mind. A chance to breathe. But breathing didn't feel easy anymore. It felt dangerous. The envelope lay unopened on the table. He hadn't taken the money back, not yet. Walter knew Hollywood well enough to understand one rule. Nothing stays quiet forever by noon. The first whisper surfaced. Not a headline. Not a phone call. A pause. A pause when Walter walked into the studio cafeteria. Conversations didn't stop, but they slowed, bent, shifted shape. Eyes lingered a second longer than they should have. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone else pretended not to see him. Walter felt it immediately. He sat down alone. Across the room, two producers leaned in close, voices low. Heard Dean covered him. Covered what? Money trouble. Big money. That doesn't sound like Dean. That's what makes it interesting. Walter's hand tightened around his fork. He hadn't told anyone. Dean hadn't told anyone. So where did it come from? That afternoon, Kirk Douglas received a call. He didn't like the tone of it. "You hearing what I'm hearing?" The voice on the other end asked. Kirk's jaw tightened. "Depends what you're hearing." That Dean Martin is paying off people's mistakes now. That he's running some quiet rescue fund. Kirk closed his eyes slowly. "Who told you that?" A pause? "Does it matter?" Yes, it mattered very much. Kirk hung up without another word and drove straight to Dean's house. Dean was in the backyard, trimming a rose bush, calm as ever. He looked up when Kirk approached and smiled. "You look like a man who didn't come to admire flowers," Dean said. Kirk didn't smile back. "They're talking," Kirk said bluntly. Dean set the shears down. "About what?" "About you," Kirk replied. "And Walter." Dean nodded once as if he had expected this all along. "Let me guess," Dean said quietly. "I'm either a fool or a saint." Kirk exhaled sharply. "Worse, they're saying you're buying loyalty, that you're covering debts so people owe you." Dean chuckled softly, not amused but resigned. "That's creative." "This isn't funny," Kirk said. "Studios don't care about truth. They care about leverage." Dean leaned against the table. Walter didn't ask for leverage. He asked for dignity. Kirk looked at him hard. And what if dignity cost him his career? That landed. Dean's expression changed not dramatically, but deeply. The smile faded. The calm shifted into something heavier that Dean said would be my fault. Walter found out the rumors that evening. A journalist cornered him outside a soundstage, pretending it was casual. "Walter." "Quick question," the man said, notebook half hidden. "There's talk Dean Martin stepped in financially for you. Care to comment?" Walter's heart slammed against his ribs. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied. The journalist raised an eyebrow. "So you're denying it?" "I'm saying," Walter said carefully, "that private acts don't deserve public distortion." That line appeared nowhere instead. The next day's trade column read, "Sources suggest a quiet bailout involving a major Rat Pack figure and a respected character actor, raising questions about influence behind the scenes." Walter read it 3 times, then he folded the paper and sat down. The mercy that had saved him was now threatening to ruin him. Dean read the article in silence. He didn't throw it away. He didn't curse. He didn't call anyone. He just stared at the words. Kirk watched him closely. "You can shut this down," Kirk said. "One statement. One denial." Dean shook his head slowly. "A denial turns a whisper into a headline. So what do?" Kirk asked. Dean folded the paper neatly. "I protect Walter." Kirk frowned. "By saying nothing?" "No," Dean replied. "By doing the one thing Hollywood doesn't expect." That night, Walter received a message. Dean wanted to see him again. Walter almost didn't. Go, every instinct screamed that being near Dean now would only feed the fire. But fear doesn't disappear by hiding from it. So he went. They sat in the same kitchen. Same chairs. Same silence. But this time, it was heavier. "I never meant for this to touch you," Walter said, voice raw. "I swear to you." Dean nodded. "I know." "They're twisting it," Walter continued, "making it sound like I took something I didn't earn, like I couldn't stand on my own." Dean leaned forward. "Walter, listen to me." Walter looked up. "The only people who think needing help makes a man small," Dean said quietly, "are men who've never carried anything worth the weight." Walter's eyes filled again, but he held it back this time. "I'll return the money," Walter said suddenly. "Tomorrow. I don't care how long it takes. I'll sell what I have. I'll take whatever work comes." Dean didn't answer immediately. Then he stood, walked to the counter, picked up the envelope, and did something Walter didn't expect. Dean tore it open. Walter jumped to his feet. Dean pulled out the check, looked at it once, and then tore it cleanly in half. Then again and again. Paper fell to the floor like quiet snow. Walter stared. "Stunned you don't owe me any more," Dean said firmly. "Not money. Not loyalty. Not silence. But the rumors," Walter started. Dean met his eyes. "Let them talk. Truth doesn't need a microphone." Walter's voice shook. "You're risking your name." Dean shrugged gently. "Names recover. People don't always—" Walter broke, then not into tears this time, but into something deeper. Gratitude mixed with terror. Relief mixed with responsibility. He realized something in that moment. This wasn't just kindness. This was trust. And trust is heavier than debt. Outside, the industry buzzed louder, but inside that kitchen, two men understood something Hollywood never would. That real power isn't in influence. It's in choosing mercy when punishment would be easier. And the storm, it wasn't over yet. By the third week, the whispers were no longer whispers. They had names now. They had tone. They had intention. Walter Matthau felt it the moment the phone stopped ringing, not dramatically, not all at once, just slowly. An agent who used to call twice a day suddenly needed more time. A producer who had promised a role said the studio was going in a different direction. Lunch invitation was rescheduled. Then, quietly forgotten, Hollywood had a way of punishing without ever admitting it was doing so. Walter sat in his living room. Scripts stacked neatly beside him, untouched. He picked one up, read the first page, then set it back down. Not because it was bad, but because he knew. He wasn't being rejected for his work. He was being corrected. Across town, a closed-door studio meeting took place without him. Walter's name appeared on the agenda only once, under risk. One executive leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Talented guy," he said. "But baggage is baggage." Another nodded. "Perception matters." A third added, "We don't need Rat Pack charity rumors attached to our release." No one defended Walter, because no one wanted to be next. Kirk Douglas heard about the meeting that night. He slammed his glass down harder than necessary. "There, freezing him out," Kirk said angrily. "Not because he did anything wrong, but because you did something right." Dean Martin sat across from him, calm but alert. "Hollywood doesn't punish cruelty," Dean replied. "It punishes independence." Kirk leaned forward, then ended. "Say something. Clear it up." Dean didn't answer right away, because the truth was simple and dangerous. If Dean spoke, the story would grow. If he stayed silent, Walter would suffer. Dean had spent his life learning when to perform and when to stand still. This moment demanded something else entirely. Walter hit his breaking point on a Thursday afternoon. He had gone to the studio. Not for a meeting, not for a role, just to walk through. Sometimes men needed to remind themselves they still existed. He stood near, soundstage he had once worked in for months, listening to laughter inside. Younger actors now. Faster voices. New faces. He smiled faintly. Then he heard it. "Careful," a voice said behind him. "Don't owe the wrong people." The laughter that followed was quiet but sharp. Walter turned. Two men he recognized. Not stars. Not nobodies. Just safe enough to be cruel. Walter didn't respond. He walked out instead. And when he reached his car, he sat there for a long time, hands trembling. Unable to turn the key, for the first time since the debt tears came back. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just the kind that fall when a man realizes his dignity is being negotiated by people who never earned it that night. Walter wrote a letter. Not to a studio. Not to an agent, to Dean. He didn't accuse. He didn't beg. He didn't dramatize. He told the truth. "I'm grateful for what you did, but I don't want your kindness to become the reason you're questioned or I'm erased. If stepping away from me protects you, I'll understand." He folded the letter carefully, and for the first time in his life, he wondered if doing the right thing had cost him everything. Dean read the letter alone. No one watched him this time. He sat at the same kitchen table, the words sinking in slowly. He didn't rush. He didn't skim. He read it twice. Then he closed his eyes. Because this was the moment he had been avoiding. The moment when kindness stopped being private. The moment when silence became cowardice. Dean stood and walked outside, breathing in the night air. He thought of all the times he had stayed quiet because it was easier. All the times charm had smoothed over hard truths. This time, charm wouldn't work. This time something had to break. The next morning, the industry woke up to a surprise. Dean Martin had agreed to a live interview. No announcement. No PR framing. No prepared statement leaked ahead of time. Just 1 hour. One chair. One microphone. Kirk Douglas watched from the side of the set. Uneasy. You sure about this? Kirk asked. Dean adjusted his jacket. No. The host smiled as the cameras rolled. Dean. There's been talk lately. Dean raised a hand gently. Before you ask, he said calmly, I want to say something. Studio went still. I've been in this business a long time, Dean continued. Long enough to know when silence helps and when it hurts. The host didn't interrupt. There's a man being quietly punished right now for something he didn't do, Dean said, and I won't let that stand. Kirk felt his chest tighten. Dean didn't name names yet, but everyone knew. Kindness isn't a transaction, Dean said. It's a choice. And if that choice costs me comfort, so be it. The host swallowed. Are you referring to? Yes, Dean said firmly. Walter Matthau. Gasps rippled through the room. Dean continued, voice steady. He didn't ask for help. He didn't manipulate anyone. He carried his burden alone until it nearly broke him. If that makes him weak in your eyes, then you've misunderstood strength. The silence was absolute. I don't owe explanations to an industry that profits from rumor, Dean finished. But I owe loyalty to a man who kept his dignity when it would have been easier to sell it. Red light went off. The damageur, the miracle was done. Walter watched the broadcast, alone, when his name was spoken. His breath caught when Dean defended him openly. Publicly, Walter broke down completely, not because he was saved, but because someone had risked something real for him. Phones began ringing again, not all friendly, not all sincere, but ringing. Hollywood hadn't forgiven Walter, but it had been reminded. And sometimes that was enough to shift the ground. The applause faded faster than anyone expected. That was the first lesson. After the interview aired, Hollywood buzzed for exactly 3 days. Headlines ran. Clips circulated. Opinions hardened, softened, then shifted again. People debated whether Dean Martin had been brave or reckless. Whether Walter Matthau had been wronged or merely exposed, then something else happened. The industry moved on. It always did. Walter felt the silence. But this time, it was different. It wasn't rejection anymore. It was evaluation. A week after the interview, Walter received an invitation, not a promise. Not a contract, a meeting. He arrived early, as he always had. The studio office smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee. 2 executives greeted him politely, carefully. One of them cleared his throat. We won't pretend the noise didn't concern us, the man said. But we won't pretend your work doesn't matter either. Walter listened. He didn't plead. He didn't defend himself. He had learned something important. Dignity doesn't argue. We're offering you a role, the executive continued. Not because of what was said, but because of how you handled it. That's all I ever wanted. When he left the building, he didn't smile. He just breathed. Dean Martin never followed up. That was the second lesson. He didn't call to ask how the meeting went. He didn't seek reassurance. He didn't claim credit. Weeks passed, then months. Dean returned to his routine's music. Quiet dinners, long evenings with no audience. The world still recognized him, still praised him, still speculated about his words, but Dean didn't revisit them, because for him, the moment had already passed. Walter, however, carried it every day. The new role wasn't glamorous. It wasn't prestigious, but it was honest. He showed up early. He worked harder than ever. Crew members noticed. Younger actors watched him carefully. One afternoon, a young man approached him between takes. Mr. Matthau, the actor said nervously, can I ask you something? Walter smiled. Of course. Is it true? What Dean Martin said. About strength? Walter studied the young man's face. The hunger, the fear, the quiet hope. Yes, Walter said softly. It's true, the young man nodded, visibly relieved. As if he'd been waiting for permission to believe that, Walter realized then that the story wasn't over. It had simply changed hands. Months later, Kirk Douglas visited Dean again. They sat on the patio, same chairs. Same quiet. You never asked how it turned out, Kirk said. Dean shrugged. Did it turn out okay? Kirk smiled. Better than okay. Walter's back. Not louder, just stronger. Dean nodded once. Good. Kirk leaned forward. You know, people still talk about that interview?
How?
Dean smiled faintly. People talk. No, Kirk said. They remember. Dean looked away, uncomfortable with the idea. I didn't do it for that, Dean said. I know, Kirk replied. That's why it mattered. Years later, long after contracts expired, long after headlines yellowed, Walter Matthau stood backstage at an event honoring lifetime contributions. He was older now, slower, but steadier. When his name was announced, the applause rose warmly. Genuinely, he stepped to the microphone and paused. He hadn't planned to say anything beyond thanks, but then he saw him. Dean Martin seated near the back. No spotlight, no wave. Just present. Walter swallowed. There are moments in a career, Walter began, that define your work, and moments in a life that define your character. The room quieted. I once owed a man a debt I thought was financial, Walter continued. But it turned out to be human. Dean shifted uncomfortably. That man never asked for repayment, Walter said. So I've spent my life trying to pay it forward instead. He looked directly at Dean. And if there's any legacy worth leaving, Walter finished. Voice thick, it's this: be the person who helps someone stand back up and never asks the world to notice. The applause was long, sustained, real. Dean didn't stand. He didn't wave. He just bowed his head, slightly, and that was enough. Later that night, the two men spoke briefly. No speeches. No emotion on display, just truth. Thank you, Walter said quietly. Dean smiled. You didn't know me that. Walter nodded. I know. They shook hands, and for a moment time felt kind. Years after, they were both gone. No headline remembered the exact number. No article could agree on the amount. Some said 50,000. Some said less. Some said more, but the number never mattered, because what endured wasn't the debt, it was the reaction, a quiet one, a human one. One that proved without performance that kindness, when chosen at cost, outlives everything else.